Moving on now. It seems the war in Israel has become a war of threats. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that Hamas's end is near. He has called on Hamas operatives to lay down their arms. Listen in to what he had to say.
In the past few days, dozens of Hamas terrorists have surrendered to our forces. They are laying down their weapons and turning themselves into our heroic soldiers. This will take time. The war is still going on, but it is the beginning of the end for Hamas. I say to Hamas terrorists, it's over. Don't die for Sinwar. Surrender now.
You heard the man. He said it's over. He asked Hamas fighters to surrender and to do it now. He also claimed that many Hamas fighters have already begun to cave in. Reports say the Israeli military has been distributing images of Palestinians surrendering in the northern Gaza Strip. Videos featuring people surrendering are making rounds on social media. We couldn't verify this footage independently. Experts say not everyone shown raising their hands or in custody is necessarily a Hamas member. It's possible that mostly civilians are caught up in this situation. Now, Israeli media is also claiming that Hamas is wearing thin. And what does Hamas have to say about this? Well, it says Netanyahu's claims are false and baseless. In return, the group has issued its own threats. It has demanded for more Palestinian prisoners to be released. It has also asked for more aid. If the demands aren't met, Hamas threatens that none of the hostages would leave Gaza alive. The group is also holding the bodies of 20 hostages who died in captivity. It's trying to leverage them to free more of its prisoners. Hostages were Hamas's best bet for negotiations. On the battleground, it stands mostly exhausted. Israeli tanks have reached the heart of Gaza's southern city of Khan Younis. The IDF had already razed northern Gaza to ground. Some 5,000 Hamas personnel have been killed. Israel claims most of them were senior commanders in the regional brigades and battalions. Those continuing to fight operate in relatively smaller groups now. What is Hamas's game plan now? Are the fighters waiting in tunnels for the US to tell Israel that time is up? You see, Israel is in a race against America's clock. Netanyahu has made it clear that his goal is to end Hamas, but he needs to fulfill his military objectives before America's support for the war runs out. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said that it is up to Israel to set the timeline for the war. He also said that everyone wants to see this campaign come to a close as quickly as possible. The United States, it's vetoed the United Nations call for a ceasefire in Gaza, but it's also stressed that Israel should maintain a low casualty count. Listen to what Netanyahu had to say.
The war continues in full force in northern and southern Gaza in order to reach all of its objectives, to eliminate Hamas, to return all of our hostages, and to promise that Gaza would not return to being a threat to Israel. I thank President Biden, who I've spoken to 2 days ago, for the United States' firm and just stance in the United Nations Security Council, and also for material aid the United States is giving to the Israeli Defense Forces.
For the time being, Netanyahu has Biden's blessings. But my question is, for how long? The Israeli Prime Minister is also facing international pressure to end the war for good. Only yesterday, he rebuffed those calls. Listen in.
ביומיים האחרונים שוחחתי גם עם הקנצלר שולץ ועם נשיא צרפת מקרון וגם עם מנהיגים אחרים.
In the past couple of days, I spoke with German Chancellor Scholz, with French President Macron and with other leaders. And I told them, you cannot, on the one hand, support the elimination of Hamas and, on the other, pressure us to end the war, which would prevent the elimination of Hamas.
We've asked this question before. Is Netanyahu trying to prolong the war just to stay in power? Israel seems to be buying time by sending more humanitarian aid for Gaza. Yet almost all of Gaza is without food and water. I have some figures for you. 1 in 3 of the households in northern Gaza rely on humanitarian aid for food. Around 97% of them have inadequate food consumption. 48% suffer from severe levels of hunger. 9 out of 10 people have reported spending at least 24 hours without food. Some reports say residents have even clashed with Hamas personnel, accusing them of taking the humanitarian aid for themselves. And moving towards its goal to wipe out Hamas, Israel is employing a new weapon: artificial intelligence. The IDF are using an AI system called Habsora. It's a Hebrew term for the gospel. What does this system exactly do? Well, it identifies targets for bombing in Gaza. What are these targets? Suspected Hamas operatives, their locations, and even their private homes. The system can also estimate the number of civilian deaths in advance. In early November, the IDF said that it had identified more than 12,000 targets in Gaza. It lauded the Target Administration Division for its hard work. However, a short statement on the IDF website revealed that it was actually using the AI-based system, the Gospel. It had significantly sped up the process of identifying targets. The system recommended targets to researchers who would then identify them. Israel first used this system back in 2021 during its 11-day war with Hamas. At the time, it generated some 100 targets a day. Let me put this in perspective for you. Israel could identify only 50 targets in Gaza every year. Not in one day, but a whole year. But in 2021, the AI machine produced 100 targets a day. Who can say how much the AI system has evolved since then? How many targets can it identify now? Does Hamas even stand a chance? If AI is the weapon, can there be any survivors? WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.